I read Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami. This is a romance book that was translated into English around 2017 is the version that I read, but I think there are earlier versions of it. I'm not totally sure. This is a reread for me, so I'm familiar with the work, although it's only the second time that I've read it. Like I said, it's a romance. It follows a 30-something, I think she's like in her late 30s, woman named Tsukiko who is single. I don't think she's ever been married or in a very serious relationship, even. And she runs into her old high school teacher, who is mostly called Sensei throughout the novel, at a local bar, and they keep running into each other over and over, and a romance kind of blossoms between the two. Tsukiko is not really out there looking for a relationship or anything. She works in an office. She has a pretty normal job in Tokyo. And then at night, she likes to go to a bar to relax. And it just so happens that the bar that she likes to frequent has her old teacher there. And they just, buy each other rounds and hang out and develop a friendship that evolves into something else. Throughout the novel, you find out that he was married and his wife ran off with someone else. It seems like his wife had some mental illness problems and she left him and their son. And then eventually, in leaving him, she ends up dying somewhere else on a little island where they visit later in the story. The point being that he is all alone, like his son has grown up and moved away, and he's in his 60s, I think. So there's about a 30-year gap between the two of them, and he's just pretty lonely, but also very reserved and polite and proper all the time, where Tsukiko is more loosey-goosey and not wound so tight. So they kind of balance each other out, I guess. They're sort of opposites attract kind of a thing. The age gap is a little bit hard for me, but I like that she's so much older. If she was, I don't know, in her early 20s, this would be really creepy and I would not be so comfortable with it. But since she's in her late 30s, she's making adult choices, and she even has another guy come into the narrative briefly named Kojima, who is her own age and was a classmate of hers in high school. So he's known her for as long as Sensei, and she just isn't very attracted to him. There's not a lot of chemistry there, even though he kind of, quote unquote, does all the right things. I think that's a really strong choice for the story because it shows that Tsukiko is not merely lonely, that she doesn't just want to be with anyone. She does have options, and she tries to resist this attraction to Sensei in various ways, but the connection between them is just very genuine and sweet and kind of low key, and she can't get away from it. She does lots of different things. She puts space between them, time. She tries to avoid him. But then after long periods of not seeing him or trying to not think about him, when she does see Sensei again, all of those feelings come right back up. And so it seems like her feelings are genuine. We never see from the perspective of Sensei, so we can't ever actually see what's going on with him. We only get the perceptions of Tsukiko, and you could never be totally sure how he feels about the relationship. They're both very reluctant, and I don't know if that has to do with propriety, about the difference in their age. I mean, obviously I'm American. I know somewhat about Japanese culture, but I feel like there's all kinds of blind spots that I have in reading this book, that there's subtext that I'm not getting. So I don't know what it is between them, but what it feels like to me is the loneliness and a kind of guarding of the heart that both characters have, where they just don't want to be hurt they don't want to lose the connection that they do have. It's a tenuous thing. They want more than friendship, both of them, I think, but they don't want to lose what friendship they have if the romance were to fail. Kojima kind of falls out of the narrative when he invites her to a kind of island weekend type trip where it's going to like they've been on like 5 or 6 dates and she's not feeling it. And he wants to take it like quote unquote to the next level with this trip. And she basically just asks Sensei, like, do you want to go on an island trip with me? And just like invites him on the same kind of thing that Kojima is inviting her on. And then after that, you just don't even hear about him in the story anymore. And it's just all about her and Sensei. And the trip doesn't like lead to any kind of sexual encounter, really. It's a lot of it's really awkward, and even they become more intimate, but that's when he reveals to her that the wife is dead and that he still thinks about her and he has feelings about his wife. And that scares her and puts distance between them. The whole book feels kind of like a fantasy in a way. And I don't mean like, Sword from the Stone, Lord of the Rings, Dragons in the Sky kind of a fantasy, but just the kind of fantasy you might have where I guess the reason that I say that, like her life, it has such a simplicity to it. We never see her work life. We never hear about like any money troubles or like she never, has to work out. She does all this eating and drinking of like interesting food and places, but she never has to work out or, you know what I mean? Or like deal with any of that stuff. There's no landlord and on and on and on. So like her life is very streamlined around this story of loneliness and romance, which is the right narrative choice, of course. But, there's no thought of like, oh, my parents, my mother, father, my brothers, sisters, they just don't exist, is something that I find a little bit conspicuous in the story, not in a bad way. But like I said, it fuels this feeling that I have that the whole thing is kind of a fantasy. There's just a simplicity of the connection between the two of them and not ever having the viewpoint of Sensei, which in a lot of Western romances, you do get the interior perspective of both people in the relationship, which I think goes a long way towards relieving feelings of anxiety or ambiguity or confusion in the story for the reader, where you're like, yes, ask them out because they are into you, like that fuels that feeling of romance when you're reading the story. But the doubt that we have right along Tsukiko gives us a connection to her. And so that's why I guess it feels to me like a female fantasy from this writer of like, oh, this very simple, purely emotional connection between these two people that's genuine and tenuous and melancholy and bittersweet. And there's all this emotional complexity and the kind of physical sexuality and physical romance of it is mostly subtracted from the relationship. It's not about that. It can't really be about that because of the age difference so much and, being in public and propriety and all this stuff. So it focuses heavily on what is going on in Tsukiko's mind and emotions, but she doesn't like, that's all there is, I guess. There's just a complete simplicity to the way that her life is constructed that's fascinating to me. So like the whole thing just feels ethereal and a little bit untethered from the mundane world that you might expect from a woman living alone in the big city of Tokyo. A lot of romances end with a kind of retroactivity of a time jump or something like that, where we go into the future and there's a looking back upon, the romance as a whole, because what we've experienced as readers tends to be the beginning of the romance, and then There's a kind of looking over of the entire relationship, or from the vantage point of some mature angle of the relationship. And what we see in this book is that Sensei dies and that she inherits his briefcase or his bag or whatever it is that he's always carrying throughout the story, and throwing things in and giving them to her. And so he gives her the briefcase, and she often thinks of him, and she keeps it with her, and she has it with her as she's kind of telling this story. It's not clear to me if she has written the book or if she is sort of narrating to us in some sense. There's no like metatextual framing or anything like that. It's nothing super fancy, but there's just a looking back. And the whole thing is not framed that way. It's not retroactive of like, oh, let me tell you about the time that I fell in love with Sensei. There's a real furtiveness that goes on, especially in the beginning of the story, I find, of like, is this even appropriate to feel, and what will happen because I feel it? How in danger am I? And on like that. So it's only at the end that she looks back and feels a gratitude for the relationship, and feels to me like a little bit of a more complete and mature person at that point. She has all these wonderful memories of the time that she spent with him, and there's an ease to the longing that she had throughout the book, and she seems less lonely as well at that point in the story. So all around a fascinating book. I'll probably have to read it again. I'm sure there's a million things that I missed, and like I said, I'm just not familiar enough with Tokyo culture and Japanese culture to catch all of those things as well. So they just fly over my American head and I don't even notice them.